So this object we're looking at is called a Lukasa. And Lukasa is the word in the language of the Luba people for long hand. So think about this object as an extension of the reader's hand, an object that is used for telling of history, for commemorating and documenting major events in history. It has an ergonomic shape. So you can see it has this kind of hourglass shape. It's meant to be held in the hand, in the left hand, and then read, okay, read or interpreted with the right hand fingers. Okay, so it's a handheld object. It has a head, oops, up here at the top, and a tail up here at the, or down here at the bottom, which is kind of indicates how the object is to be held. Only certain people from the Mbuji society, both men and women could be in that society, are able to use this object. And it was used to tell of the past, but then also to help interpret contemporary things as well. So Lukasa is a memory board. Again, it means long hand. If you like alliteration and if that helps you remember things, you can remember this as the Luba Lukasa, because Luba is the people group. The Mbuji Society is the society of interpreters, the people who can actually utilize this object in the correct way, and both men and women could be part of that society. Now, these objects, because they are carved, would be made by men. It's wood with metal nails or stakes kind of holding in these wood and shell beads. It would have been brighter colors when it was originally painted, but that has, of course, worn over time. A member of the Mbuji Society would use this object to give an oral performance of history. So again, we've talked about kind of how different cultures think about and document history. And one of the things we talked about was with the Aztec. So when we looked at the Aztec calendar stone from Tempo Mayor, it is cyclical, right? It tells history in this cyclical form that every 52nd year they would get new fire from the heavens. Then when the conquistadors show up in Mexico and the viceroys are put into place and they force them to make the Codex Mendoza, right? The Codex Mendoza has that glyph series on the front that is done with squares or rectangles. And so it is forcing the Aztec to demonstrate time in a linear, progressive way, which is different for them. But in the Western cultures, that's how we do time. We do time on calendars that have rows of 7 days at a time, right? Typically starting on Sunday, ending on Saturday, and we see it as this very linear thing. We also see events from the past as factual, right? And we say, okay, well, this happened in this year, and we see that as a hard fact. That is different from the context of the Luba people. The Luba people instead have this understanding that history, specifically royal history, can be fluid. It can change, and that's a little bit confusing for those of us who have this kind of rigid view of time in the past. And so if each one of these little shells or beads represents an event, okay, it could be a coronation of a king, it could be the birth or death of a king, it could be a military infraction, it could be something to do with a feast or a famine. Each one of these little beads, these little markers, can change based on how the reader wants to interpret it. So let's say that the audience is the king and the queen, and the ceremony where the Mbuji is going to read this, he might make these beads stand for something different than if he was reading it to a group of elders from the community. So even the marks, the objects themselves, can represent different things based on the context of the audience. Okay, so this is a really fluid view of history and ancestral lineage, power lineage, right? The lineage of the king, than what we would typically expect to see, certainly in a Western culture. We're going to have these facts of, King Edward lived here to here, right? And you would have that data as very linear. Here is someone from the society reading the object. And again, he or she is not just going to read this at home. No, they're going to put on a certain outfit. They're going to dress in a ritualistic way, right? We have the makeup on here. And he is sitting and reading this for an audience, interpreting it with his fingers. So again, usually held in the left hand, read by the right hand, and he is going to interpret those beads as different events in history. So to their context, an oral narrative that's dynamic, that can change, is very, very important. It is meant to reinforce the current administration, right? The current king, while at the same time showing the that the king is authentic, right? That his past, that his how he got to be in this place is just and is correct. It can be used to interpret or judge contemporary situations, like whether or not the Luba should trade with a certain group. They can consult this object, this memory board. It is performative, right? Because as it is being read, that history, that story can be shared. It is going to be part of a larger ritual that would involve song and dance. The Luba were very active in trade, and so sometimes we'll see objects included that are trade goods, certain shells, certain types of beads. Again, the Mbuji society, called the Men of Memory, but women could actually be part of the society as well. They are the keepers of this oral tradition. So they have a very important place in the Luba society. Kingship is viewed as sacred, as divinely appointed. Remember that white around the eyes, right? In the African mask that we've looked at, white around the eyes has to do with transcending, with seeing the spiritual, right? Like second sight. The Lukasa can predict the future, which is pretty impressive. Each one is unique, made by an individual with different numbers of beads and different types of carving. You can see the one being held here is actually not ergonomic. It doesn't have that hourglass shape, so they can be different shapes. But really, it's very important that this idea of touch, of the tactile qualities here, that you're thinking about the bumps, right, and the ridges, and how this object is interpreted in feel, in touch. Depending on the audience, the story, the things represented by these beads can be different, right? And so if this is being read to the king, it's going to be read differently. It's going to be interpreted differently than other members in society. This is one way they kept up with their divine, or their historical and royal lineage as well. Here's some other examples. Shells can be included. They almost look like a ping pong kind of, no, not ping pong, pinball machine kind of. You kind of get the sense that there's like, they can ping back and forth between these different events that are being depicted. This one's figurative, which is interesting. So a tradition for the Luba people.